and welcome back to another episode of Come Back Stronger. I'm Dana Brooks of Fasig Brooks, and I'm joined today with my law partner, Carrie Roan. So welcome. Filling in again for Jimmy Fasig.
I'm pitch hitting for Jimmy.
Yeah, good. Well, we've got a great show. The guest for this segment is a friend of mine. She was my neighbor down at the coast for a while, and I'm so excited about her because it's another woman-owned business, and y'all know how I feel about those. I'm all about it. Her name is Deborah Keller. She goes by Keller, but you may know her and may have seen her products around town because she's known as the Oyster Mom. Yep. So this is going to be a Come Back Stronger story about how she and other aquaculture farmers are trying to bring back oysters to our bays and clean our bays and that sort of thing. So.
I love it, and I love that she's a woman doing it. How often do you see women that are owning oyster farming businesses and learning and teaching themselves?
Yeah, I love it. And she started this, she was a big conservationist. And so she started it, you'll hear her story, of course, but she was really into this and trying to, look at what was going on in Wakulla County and how to bring the health back to our bays, and which is just a, habitat for all kinds of wildlife and things. Yeah. So it's really important to do. And if you grew up like, I did up here in the northwest part of Florida, oysters, you'd hear about them for years coming from Apalachicola, and everybody would want those. You'd always ask people, are these from Louisiana or are these from Apalachicola?
Right.
And then, for a myriad problems that they've had sustaining wild oysters, and we'll learn more about that. But what these people are doing and the products that they're putting out is so awesome. And my favorite thing is we get to have oysters all year round now.
It's awesome.
So,
well, it's very inspirational because obviously they've taken a hit with the hurricanes and with COVID and everything else. So I think it's really inspirational that she's doing this, and I think it should give a lot of people hope that you can survive in this industry despite being knocked down many times.
Yeah, and then this is, you'll hear it in a minute, but this is her first foray into business ownership, and she is killing it. So
awesome.
We will be back to hear Keller's story, Oyster Mom, right after this.
I can't wait.
I recently had a new client, and she suffered a mild traumatic brain injury.
Okay.
And she had no idea what had happened that caused her to be injured.
Gotcha.
But it turns out she had fallen into a pit at an oil change station. And it was 100% their fault.
Oh, wow.
But her injury made her not even understand
her injury, and it
it
makes me so frustrated because folks that suffer concussions or mild traumatic brain injuries, it's really difficult for them to know what happened and to understand the difference in what their life was and what it is now because of the nature of their condition. And so the insurance companies need to recognize the full value of that.
Instead of taking advantage of that very unique situation.
It took her family telling her, you need to call an attorney. Her family coming with her to the appointment to say, these are the differences to get her in there, and now we're able to help her.
I love that. And we are back for Kimmy Hogan's first interview with Deborah Keller.
Keller, thank you so much for being with us.
I'm glad to be here.
So you are an oyster farmer.
I am.
How did you get into that?
Background of just caring about conservation and the health of our ecosystems. And I was put on the advisory board of the Wakulla Environmental Institute here locally. It's part of TCC, to start nature-based jobs. And we thought, well, reviving the oyster industry would be a very good thing to do for this area. So Wakulla Environmental Institute launched an oyster aquaculture class, and I was one of the first 10 members of that class. And certainly learned a lot.
Yes.
And then we put oysters in the water.
That's wonderful. So what happened to the oyster crop?
So the wild oyster population crashed, and it crashed for a lot of different reasons. Historically, there was an abundance of wild oysters in this area, but a couple things have happened. Water management issues, also the resource itself, the oysters themselves were somewhat over-harvested. Their shells were taken as a byproduct of the oyster meat itself and put into road construction. And the oyster needs that shell on the bottom of the bay to reproduce, to really have a good sound place for it to grow. Taking those shells away caused a part of the problem. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill did not hit our area, but we thought it was going to. And so at the time, Governor Scott said just harvest. And so that took away the reproducing population of oysters that were out there. So there's a lot of different reasons, but it just has declined over the decades and down to a point where it's really not sustainable.
So tell me about oyster farming.
It's a commitment. I don't know how else to say that. It's we basically are out on the bay in the Gulf of Mexico, and oyster aquaculture has been happening for hundreds of years. There's proof that the Native American Indians did some oyster aquaculture. America, you think about the big cities, New York City, Washington, Boston, all those places grew up on eating oysters from the bay. A real reliable source of protein all year round, pretty easy to catch. They don't run. And so oyster aquaculture, we brought it here, and it is literally farming oysters in the sea, in the Gulf of Mexico. So here in Florida, we actually buy little seed that is produced in a hatchery, and then we put it in a protective cage of some sort. There's several different systems. I happen to use a floating oyster aquaculture cage, and we manage the density of the oysters in that cage and the size of oyster in that cage, and just watch them grow up over the course of a year or a little bit longer till we can harvest them.
So when I'm eating an oyster, that oyster took about a year to get from seed
If
to...
it's an aquaculture oyster from the Gulf of Mexico.
Okay.
If it's an aquaculture oyster from way up north, say in Canada or Maine, it might take as many as 3 years for it to grow to market size.
Okay.
And typically a wild oyster, to get to the 3-inch size that is mandatory for harvesting a wild oyster, that's about 2.5, 3 years.
Okay.
So because we put our oysters in the sweet spot, right, where there's great algae and plankton for them to eat, they grow a little bit faster. And I think, their shells are not quite as heavy, so they probably don't put as much energy into creating that shell and more into just growing.
That's so interesting. So I want to talk a little bit more about you. So you were a conservationist for many years and then became a part of this program and just said, I'm going to learn how to oyster farm. Had you ever been out on a boat before you started this adventure?
I had been out on a boat to fish a little bit and sunbathe. I grew up in Pennsylvania, though, so boating was not part of my past. My husband likes to fish and boat a little bit, so we'd go out into the St. Mark's National, out there past the lighthouse, but not very much at all. No, I was more of a mountain girl.
And I love it, but that didn't scare you from taking on this task.
No, putting oysters back in our ecosystem is incredibly important for the health of our bays. The estuaries and bays are the nursery for everything else that exists in the Gulf of Mexico. It's critical to the health of our waters. And so making sure that oysters were there and putting them back as sort of a restoration project takes a tremendous amount of time, public money or foundation money. But this was a way. I think oyster aquaculture, you have a bunch of people who want to create a living and support an industry that will use their own money to put oysters back in the bay. And so we all put millions and millions of oysters in the bay. And they are out there doing the little oyster thing, filtering water and creating habitat and producing a sustainable food source for people to enjoy.
And so with this project where you're doing the aqua farming, am I using the right terms?
Aquaculture.
Aquaculture. Is that going to help reestablish the wild oyster population?
It does. We all raise the eastern oyster, it's called, the Cassistraea virginica. But there are two types. There's the diploid and the triploid oyster. And the diploid oyster is essentially a wild oyster. It reproduces and would release egg and sperm into the water, and thus could be repopulating the entire bay because they'll be out there reproducing. The triploid oyster is a sterile oyster. It's more resistant to disease. It grows a little faster, more uniform in shape, and doesn't reproduce, so you can sell it all year round. So a lot of us are growing the triploid oyster. We're still having a supply issue with that. So people are moving into both sorts. But yes, we're out there, and we're just the Oyster filtering the water, each one, or they say, filters 50 gallons of water a day.
Wow.
And so that's improving the water quality of the bay itself, and that helps everything.
Well, we're going to go to a commercial break, but when we come back, I want to talk more about your business.
Okay, thanks.
Wow, that was fun. That was fun to learn about.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
I mean, I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was a kid, and I'm just like glued to the television in this interview right now because it's so interesting. I mean, the different types of oysters, what they do, how much water they filter, how good they are for us.
Yeah.
And I mean, it's fascinating too that she learned a whole new business after being born and raised in the mountains of Pennsylvania. Never really growing up on a boat like most of us did.
Yeah, I don't even know what would enter my head to think, okay, I'm going to try something different. I mean, really different.
Right.
Stuff that I have no experience in whatsoever. But I've watched the people working on her land. And I mean, this is some back-breaking work that you have to do. I mean, you've got to flip these things. She'll get into that a little bit more about why they need air and what all that does. But what I like is you can control the size of them, because I'm funny about my oysters. I like them tiny and cold and very salty. A lot of people like a big oyster or whatever. So I like that we have all this variety now. And these shells have spawned this other like side gig economy. People are turning them into jewelry. I bought some. Quincy Hambless, I think is one who does it. But she uses Oyster Mom's shells, and they're so pretty and they're so clean. You know, it's not like the oysters of yesterday. So I'm fascinated by the whole thing.
Yeah,
I cannot believe you can actually grow, this living thing on a leased piece of, water.
Well, and have it do so well for our economy and our environment.
And our bay.
And our health.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But what I love too is that it's a very obviously male-dominated industry.
Oh, yeah.
Historically speaking. So for her to be a woman and not know anything about it and get into it and now be doing so well with it, I think is amazing.
Yeah, I don't want to misspeak, but I think she is the only woman, a farmer. I've met several of them, but I think she's the only one. But when we come back after this break, we'll hear the second part of Keller's story.
You know what's funny? When law firms advertise that they'll give a free consultation, every consultation we give is free, unless we can get you a settlement based on your injuries.
Right.
Every time you give me a call, it's free.
Yeah.
I want you to give me a call.
Yeah.
You know, we're not going to charge you unless we actually get you something for your case.
That's right. You don't have to pay me anything unless I win the case.
Right.
And on top of that, I'm going to pay for all of the court costs and the deposition costs and medical records costs and expert opinions costs. All of that's coming out of my pocket, and if we don't win the case, then we eat those costs at no charge to you.
Right. So we don't take a case we don't believe in because it's not in our interest.
Right.
And we don't minimize or devalue your case because that's also not in our interest. Right. So it makes everything fair.
If you have a lawyer on a contingency fee, you can hire the very best lawyer.
And we are back for the second segment of Kimmy Hogan's interview with Deborah Keller.
All right, I want to talk with you about your business. It's called the Oyster Mom.
That's correct. Yep.
And tell me what you do. Do you farm oysters? You sell oysters? Tell me all about it.
So I raise the oysters, nurture them out in the Gulf of Mexico. And I've also become a processor, which means I process the oysters and sell them directly. A lot of my business is retail business, so I sell them directly to people here in the Tallahassee area so they can enjoy oysters in their own home at their own events and celebrations. I do all aspects of the business, the work on the farm, the processing, the sales, the marketing, the social media, the accounting, the boat maintenance. So that one's really fun.
Wow.
I never did that before. Just all aspects of being an entrepreneur, which it's my first foray into running my own business. So it's been a real learning experience.
Oh, I bet. Tell me more about that. How did you learn how to do all parts of the business?
So we had a class at the Wakulla Environmental Institute that was a 12-week long class to learn about oysters and how to do aquaculture. We had field days and working outside a little bit. I went to Alabama and met with some oyster farmers that were actually doing oyster aquaculture. Worked with them for a day, saw the hatchery, learned a lot from the University of Alabama, their program that they've got talk to as many people as I possibly could, but it's pretty much seat of the pants. It really is. I mean, you've got to get out there and see the conditions on your lease, how your boat reacts to different things, what your equipment's doing. I started out with one type of equipment and it really didn't work on my lease. Had to sell all of that equipment and buy all new equipment that now is working quite nicely. But a learning experience.
Tell me about the lease.
So it's sovereign submerged land that we rent from the state of Florida. And before starting the oyster aquaculture class, I helped secure the permits, the general programmatic permit, from the Army Corps of Engineers and the National Marine Fisheries Service to be able to do oyster aquaculture in Florida waters.
Okay.
And then we went before the Florida governor and cabinet to get approval to actually put the leases in. The leases out there are surveyed plots of water with markers and everything that we have to maintain. So I have my 1.5 acres out there that I farm my oysters on.
So interesting. So you really just dove into it, and I guess like anybody, right? You're starting a new business, you got to learn how to do it and just go for it.
Everything was new. I had never driven a boat before I became oyster mom. So I had never shucked an oyster before I became an oyster mom. So all of these really basic things I had to learn. And then, finding out how to do the accounting program, things, even the social media and advertising on social media. So everything has been brand new to me, a challenge, hiring and firing people, managing their time to cards, the insurance and liability protection I need to have, everything. And then I decided to also become a processor, which involves inspections and maintaining a site where I have my refrigeration and do my sales. And then on top of that, decided to become a caterer with an oyster bar service. So I go to weddings and parties and things and shuck oysters for people.
Oh, that's great.
So it's all new.
What's been the hardest part about starting this new journey?
Well, there were a lot of challenges with it. Weather is one. I mean, it's not just the storms, it's every day. What's the wind? What's the wind direction? How do you manage things out there? So I've found that a real learning experience, and it's hard to be taught that. I think it's more by feel. I've learned a lot about those challenges out on the water, and then how to take care of my equipment in serious weather events. There's challenges of marketing my oysters, and making sure that the level of marketing that I do is consistent with the amount of product I have to sell. And so I'm also sometimes purchasing from other oyster farmers to make sure that I have enough product to sell. And that's interesting because everybody's oysters, believe it or not, look different. And so my customers might be very accustomed to what my oysters are, the bay flavor of my oysters, and so I purchase only from my bay so that they have consistency there. But people take care of their oysters different, so they look different.
Interesting. So how do you take care of your oysters? That varies.
It's pretty steep commitment. It's the regular being out on the water, managing the density of the oysters in the cages that I raise them in, managing the size, sorting, and making sure they're tumbled so that they have a nice shape to them in a deep cup, good meat in there, and that they're desiccated so they don't have a lot of other things growing on top of them.
And what does it mean to be desiccated?
It means basically you have to go out and flip the oysters into the air for a 24-hour period of time and then flip them back. So each cage gets flipped over up. And then the sunlight and the air, the fresh air, just sort of kills anything that's brand new that's decided to spawn on top of my oysters. And that keeps the shell pretty.
Okay. So how many oysters do you have growing at any given time?
Usually around 250,000. I've stayed very small because I was working full-time for the Nature Conservancy. So I wanted to keep my farm at a size where I could manage it. And so now I just left the Conservancy last year, so I'm looking at expanding.
Oh, wonderful. Wonderful. And so if people want to find you and get your oysters, how do they find you?
Well, I'm here in Tallahassee. I have a website, oystermom.com, social media, Facebook and Instagram. Just look for Oyster Mom. And that's the best way. I have a lot of people texting me all the time and emailing me and calling me, but the website is really good. You can actually purchase your oysters on the website.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for coming on and teaching us all a little bit about oysters.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Wow, how cool is that?
That was fascinating. I want more. I want more of Oyster Mom.
I forgot we were doing this show. I'm just like, I just want to keep watching this, this interview.
She's so inspirational. I mean, honestly, she's one of the coolest people I've seen interviewed, really.
I know. She's very cool. I thought about you a lot because you, a brave person, you go out and you pilot your own boat. But you know how that is. I mean, you look at the weather, like yesterday, it was choppy. I mean, you didn't really want to be on the water yesterday, but she's got to be out on the water, every 24 hours doing something, or, she could lose her entire crop, her entire inventory.
Yeah, 250,000 oysters,
Yeah.
and she's got to flip them. She's got to learn. She didn't even know how to shuck an oyster before she started this business. I know.
That's crazy. But this is what's impressive to me, because I would like to have her as a guest. We have a Facebook group and called the Empower Plan, and we do something every Thursday. It's called the Empower Hour, and we have a guest on, and it's usually some inspirational woman or someone doing something great for women. But I would love to have her on because all this is going on while she's trying something for the first time, trying something new, then throw a little COVID on it, and she was always in retail, and so then she just had to really pivot. So you might have run into her at some of the farmers markets. She does that. You might have been seeing her at some events. I think she was part of a big wine festival that we had and a cooking thing, but I just like that she just said, okay, got to pivot, got to roll, got to keep this thing going, and now she's looking at expanding.
That's what makes her so inspirational, I think, because so many people are suffering with being hit by COVID or being hit by, a loss of a job or maybe a loss of a spouse, and she is, proof positive that if you believe in yourself and you want to do it and you put the work in and the effort and learn about it, it can be done.
Yeah, you just have to be agile, and unfortunately that's where women tend to shine. They can turn anything into a success. They just through nothing but hard work and determination, and she's certainly that. Like I said, she's spun off into other things. She was selling to restaurants, then when restaurants got shut down, she had to do something else. I just like that she's such an inspiration for other women and girls and to do what she's doing, but I would love to hear more from her. I'm like you, I can't stop with this story. It's too good. But we will be right back to wrap up after this next break.
I went to lunch with one of my former clients the other day, and she's doing great. She took the money from her settlement and she started her own company buying and selling vehicles, which is really cool because she was in a car crash and then needed a new vehicle. And so now she's able to help other folks out.
Most of our clients, they find that one of the most frustrating things is the dealing with the vehicle.
Oh, well, losing your car can totally disrupt your life.
You can lose your livelihood over it. If you can't get to work, or what's the worst thing with our clients is we're just trying to help them get well. But if they can't get to the health care that they need, that's just another setback.
One of the typical things about a comeback story is you take the pain and the struggles and the challenges that you've been through, and you use that as the fire that kind of motivates you to do something good for other people.
Yeah.
And so I love that because now our client did exactly that, like literally to the T.
And we are back. I'm back with my law partner, Carrie Roan, and we just finished a riveting interview by Kimmy Hogan, our other law partner, with Deborah Keller, the Oyster Mom. I'm just fascinated. I want to do something cool like that, just like throw your whole life away and do something like make, furniture or something. I don't know.
Well,
I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that.
That's what, when I was thinking during the commercial break, Keller reminds me of you because you did that. You graduated law school and bought a law firm.
Yeah.
And never owned a law firm before.
No.
Or a business, right? Because your background was social work and paralegal. So you had to all of a sudden throw yourself into how do you own a business? How do you manage people? Keller was talking about how do you manage time cards?
Right.
Hiring and firing. So what was that like for you?
It was scary, but like her, this I identify with her so much because the one thing I wasn't going to do is fail.
Yeah.
You know, that was one option I removed immediately. And then later on, like years later, I told you, I found out they'd given this opportunity to 5 other people who did not either take it or didn't do well at it. They were all 5 men, and that was their first mistake. No, I identify with her because she removed, you know, failure from her options as well. And she said, this is going to be successful. I will work harder. I will learn more. I will be more hands-on. If you notice, her hand is in every bit of that business. And I have watched her try to employ people, because I said this is back-breaking labor sometimes. You got to be able to be on a boat, not have those issues in whatever seas, and you've got to be able to physically flip these cages or crates or whatever they're in. But you know, and she has a hard time. And whenever your employee doesn't show up, you don't just go, well, okay, we'll take today off. You get in your boat and you go do it. And I don't know how in the world she did that while maintaining her full-time position with the Nature Conservancy, but she did that for years.
Yeah.
So
and now she's just doing the oysters on her own because she's been that successful.
And ready to expand.
But again, that reminds me of you in our personal injury practice, where you've had to learn social media and marketing and HR and healthcare insurance.
Right.
You know, and I mean, what do you tell yourself when you're down or feeling like, you know, tired?
Tired. And that's, you know, it all looks great and it looks fun and glamorous and stuff, but yeah, it's a business. I don't care what you're doing, it's a business. And every business has problems. You have people, you have employee problems, you have supply and demand. You know, when COVID happened to us, you know, if nobody's on the road, you know,
we were scared.
We were scared. So, but you learn, you pivot. You go and look. Say, what is the need now, and who's not meeting it, and then you go meet that need. And so, if we had to turn into family law attorneys, or we had to turn into criminal defense attorneys, we were going to do that. But yeah, you just make your mind up that you're not going to fail, and you give it whatever it takes.
And you get used to waking up at 3 o'clock every morning.
Yeah,
Worried.
scared. Scared, start going through your case list and thinking about every little, you know, missile or bomb that's sitting in your you know, email inbox. But eventually things calm down and you get the hang of it. Like Keller, you just get into a groove and then things just start happening, and then you almost get this synergy of success.
Right. And I think with Keller, it's mostly due to her personality too.
Oh yeah.
I mean, she seems like an absolute, I know she's your neighbor, so you know her, and I don't know her, but just from the interview, she seems so lovely and kind and compassionate.
She really is. She's a great comeback stronger story, and what she's doing for the oyster industry is wonderful. So if you know of anybody who's got a good comeback stronger story, recommend them to us. Contact us. We would love to have them on the show. Thanks for watching, guys.
And you know what the insurance company offered him? $5,000.
Really?
He's completely blind, and they offer him $5,000. Ask him to sign a release.
To a lot of people, especially when they're hurting and when they're down and when they're vulnerable, $5,000 is a life-changing amount of money. Yeah. And they're not looking at the value of what has been lost. They're not looking at what it would take to make that person whole, which is our job.
Yeah.
That's our job. Their job isn't. Their job is to save the insurance company money.
Right.
And they look at this person and they go, I bet $5,000 would get your full attention. Right. And they come in and they dangle it with a settlement release, and then once you sign it, you're done. You can't come back to us and ask us to wave a magic wand and make that go away. That can't go away.
My client didn't accept the $5,000. We took him all the way to trial. We got a $5 million verdict.